structure of sentences. Everything we say is in the form of sentences. What I am saying right now, what you hear are all sentences. Do you see how important sentence is to communicate? If I spoke to you about using random words with no proper structure, would you understand what I am trying to say? No, certainly you would not. What is a sentence? A sentence is a grammatical unit consisting of one or more words that are grammatically linked. A sentence can include words grouped meaningfully to express a statement. Question, exclamation, request, command, and suggestion. A sentence can also be defined as anything which is contained between a capital letter and a full stop. A sentence should introduce a subject, deal with the subject, and come to a conclusion. It is basically an order in which you use words to convey what you want to say to people. So, in short, we can define sentence as a group of words which makes complete sense. The sentence is the base of the English language. We need to know how to build a strong base and what we can and cannot add to it. Grammar is the study of sentence structure and how words are related to one another in a sentence. To learn the proper formation of sentence, one must know the components involved in the making of a sentence. Consider the sentence, Rita is singing on the stage. This is a proper sentence and has a proper structure. In this chapter, we will deal with the parts of the sentence and the appropriate structure of the sentence. Parts of a sentence. To learn the semantic structure or structure of sentence, we must first learn the various parts of the sentence. As I have already mentioned earlier, a sentence should introduce a subject, deal with the subject, and conclude. Every word in a sentence serves a specific purpose within the structure of that particular sentence. According to rules of grammar, sentence structure can sometimes be quite complicated. Each part of the sentence has something to offer to the sentence. It could be an action, a meaning, an emphasis, or doubt. The way the sentence is structured is crucial in any form of statement. The different parts of the sentence are subject, predicate, object, indirect object, and complement. The two most basic parts of a sentence are subject and predicate. The subject of a sentence is the person, place, or thing that is performing the actions of the sentence. The subject represents what or whom the sentence is about. The simple subject usually contains a noun or pronoun and can include modifying words, phrases, or clauses. In a sentence, every verb must have a subject. If the verb expresses action like sneeze, jump, bark, or study, the subject is who or what does the verb. A subject can be a noun or a pronoun that is partnered with an action verb. Let me give you an example. Consider the sentence. Tom danced in the party. Danced is an action verb. Tom is who did the dancing. Hence, Tom is the subject. To begin analyzing a sentence, we must first identify the subject. There are three general criteria for the identification of a subject in a sentence. The first criterion is subject-verb agreement. The subject agrees with the finite verb in person and number. For example, I am as opposed to I is. I am fulfills this criterion, whereas I is does not. Hence, I am is the correct phraseology. The second criterion is position occupied. The subject typically precedes the finite verb in declarative clauses in English. For example, Tom laughs. The third criterion is the semantic role. A typical subject in the active voice is an agent or theme, that is, it performs the action expressed by the verb, or when it is a theme, it receives a property assigned to it by the predicate. Of these three criteria, the first one, agreement, is the most reliable. The subject is English and many other languages agree with the finite verb in person and number, and sometimes in gender as well. The second and third criteria are merely strong tendencies that can be disregarded in certain constructions. Let me illustrate this with some examples. Consider the sentence, Tom is studying chemistry. Here all three criteria combine to identify Tom as the subject. Now consider the sentence, is Tom studying chemistry? This sentence involves the subject auxiliary inversion of a yes or no question. Here the subject immediately follows the finite verb instead of immediately preceding it, which means the second criteria is disregarded. Predicate. The predicate expresses action and being within the sentence. The simple predicate contains the verb and can also contain modifying words, phrases or clauses. The predicate provides information about the subject, such as what the subject is, what the subject is doing and what the subject is like. The relation between a subject and its predicate is sometimes called a nexus. A predicate is seen as a property that a subject has or is characterized by. A predicate is therefore an expression that can be true of something. The predicate serves either to assign a property to a single argument or to relate two or more arguments to each other. Here is an example. Samantha collects reptiles. In this sentence, as you know, the subject is Samantha. The predicate collects reptiles tells you what Samantha does. The verb here is the action verb, collects. Does the subject always come before the predicate? No, the subject is not always first. There are three cases in which the subject appears after the verb instead of before it. The first case is when the sentence is in the form of a question. For example, let us consider the question, are you ready? Here the subject you appears after the verb are. The second case when the sentence begins with the words here or there. For example, here comes the jury. Here the subject jury appears after the verb comes. Some sentences beginning with one or more prepositional phrases fall under the third case. For example, let us consider the sentence, across the clearing and through the stream ran the frightened deer. Here the subject deer comes after the verb ran. Well, now you know how to identify subject and predicate in a sentence by posing different questions. Let me give you an activity. Take the subject, the man, and the predicate, builds a house. Combine the two form a sentence. The sentence obtained is, the man builds a house. The subject and predicate make up the two basic structural parts of any complete sentence. In addition, there are other elements contained within the subject or predicate which adds meaning and detail. These elements include the direct object, indirect object and the subject complement. All of these elements can be expanded and further combined into simple compound complex or compound complex sentences. Object. In a sentence, an object is as important as the subject. It describes the action of the subject. To define the sentences, better objects are classified into direct object and indirect object. Let us know about direct object. The direct object receives the action of the sentence. The direct object is usually a noun or pronoun. A direct object receives the action performed by the subject. The verb used with a direct object is always an action verb. Another way of saying it is that the subject does the verb to the direct object. The direct object must be a noun or pronoun. Let me give you a simple example. The man builds a house. The direct object here is the noun, a house. What does the man build? The direct object answers the question. As I said earlier, a direct object can also be a pronoun. For example, let us consider the sentence, the man builds it. Identify the direct object here. Here the pronoun it is the direct object. A sentence with a compound verb may have two different direct objects in it. Example, the dog ate the meat and drank some water. The direct object for the verb ate is meat and the direct object for the verb drank is water. Just remember this simple formula, indirect object. You can read a book or a newspaper and identify objects in each sentence. You will realize that indirect objects are rare. You can read for pages before you encounter one. It tells to whom or for whom something is done. The indirect object always comes between the verb and the direct object. The indirect object is also usually a noun or pronoun. Let us consider the sentence. The man builds his family a house. What is the direct object here? It is a house. For whom does he build the house? Yes, his family. So, that is the indirect object in the sentence. Now, you can know how to identify direct and indirect objects in a sentence. Using direct and indirect objects will help you construct a perfect sentence. You must not get confused between the subject pronouns and the object pronouns in a sentence. So, take a good look at the table. Subject complement. A subject complement is found in the predicate of a sentence. A subject complement either renames or describes the subject and therefore is usually a noun, pronoun or adjective. Subject complements occur when there is a linking verb within the sentence. A complement is something that completes, and a subject complement is something that completes our idea of the subject of a sentence by giving us more information about it. Usually, the subject complement is a noun, a pronoun or an adjective. When a person tells you that you are beautiful or handsome or tall, he describes you. Similarly, subject complement describes the subject and gives more meaning to a sentence. For example, let us consider this sentence. The man is a good father. Here, the word father describes the man. Hence, that is the subject complement. Using these sentence fragments, sentences are structures in three different ways. They are simple sentences, compound sentences and complex sentences. We will now see each of them in detail. Simple sentence. As the name describes, the most basic type of sentence is simple sentence. The most natural sentence structure is the simple sentence. It is the first kind which children learn to speak and it remains as the most common sentence in the spoken language of people of all ages. In written work, simple sentences can be very effective for arresting a reader's attention or for summing up an argument. The simple sentence has only one class, the independent class. A simple sentence, also called an independent clause, contains a subject and a verb and it expresses a complete thought. Let me give you a simple example. I drink coffee. Here the subject is I, verb is drink and it expresses a complete thought. A simple way to identify a simple sentence is it mentions one action. These are other examples of a simple sentence. In these simple sentences, subjects are in yellow and verbs are in green. Keep the pattern in mind. Next, we will go on to compound sentence. Students, if you have understood simple sentence, compound sentences are very easy to understand. What is a compound sentence? Well, a compound sentence is a sentence that has two independent clauses joined by a conjunction: for, and, nor, but, or, yet. A conjunctive verb, however, therefore, or a semicolon alone. Take a look at the example. Here the subjects are in yellow, verbs are in green, and the coordinators and the commas that precede them are in red. This is the simple syntax of compound sentences. A compound sentence is most effective when you use it to create a sense of balance or contrast between two or more equally important pieces of information. For example, consider the sentence, Bangalore has a lot of parks, but Chennai has a beach. It is rather easy, is it not, students? Next, we will move on to complex sentence. Complex sentence has an independent clause joined by one or more dependent clauses or subordinate clauses. A subordinate clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb but does not express a complete thought. A complex sentence always has a subordinator such as because, since, after, although or when, or a relative pronoun such as that, who or which. If you start a sentence with a dependent making words or subordinating conjunction, place a comma between the clauses. On the other hand, if you start with the independent clause and place the dependent making words in the middle of the sentence, do not use a comma. Let us consider the sentence. Let us consider the sentence. Even though Eva took turf management just to fill out her schedule, she found it unexpectedly interesting. This sentence starts with a dependent clause, hence a comma is used. On the other hand, consider the statement, Eva found turf management unexpectedly interesting even though she took it just to fill out her schedule. This sentence begins with an independent clause, hence a comma is not used. Pay attention to these complex sentences. Subjects are in yellow and verbs are in green, and the subordinators and their commas when required are in red. When a sentence is a combination of a compound sentence and a complex sentence, it is called a compound complex sentence. A compound complex sentence contains at least one independent clause and at least one subordinate or dependent clause. You will understand this very easily if you have understood compound and complex sentences. Let me give you an example of compound complex sentence. As the dog howled, one cat sat on the fence and the other licked its paws. This type of sentence generally has two independent clauses joined by one or more dependent or subordinate clauses. Take a good look at this illustration. Importance of structure of sentences. Students, for both speaking and writing, a proper structure of sentences is very important. Since people are not able to see your facial expressions or hear your voice inflections while reading, when you have to say standardized sentence structure allows the reader to correctly interpret your meaning. A poorly structured sentence is easily misinterpreted. If a sentence is not properly constructed, it is no longer a sentence. What you speak or write becomes fragments of sentences. This will lead to several complications in communication as someone may not be able to understand what you are trying to convey. Sentences provide us with a framework for the clear written expression of our ideas. The aim in writing is always to write in complete sentences which are correctly punctuated Sentences always begin with a capital letter and end in either a full stop, exclamation or question mark. A complete sentence always contains a verb, expresses a complete idea and makes sense standing alone. Linguists broke down grammar to several minute parts so that we can learn them and perfect the language. We cannot learn any language without learning how to construct a properly structured sentence. Once you are aware of the different types of sentence construction, you can then choose and correctly punctuate the most helpful type of sentences for the expression of your idea. In this chapter, we dealt with the structure of sentences. We first learned that a sentence is a grammatical unit consisting of one or more words that are grammatically linked. You learned how important sentences are for any mode of communication. That is why linguistics is a subject to be studied in depth. Linguists broke down this unit to several smaller grammatical units so that you as students will have a better idea on how to create sentences. We then saw that the basic structure of a sentence has two parts, the subject and the predicate. You now know that the subject of a sentence is the person, place or thing that is performing the action of the sentence. The subject represents what or whom sentence is about. We then saw that the other half of the sentence is the predicate part. The predicate indicates what the action of the subject is. The relation between a subject and its predicate is sometimes called a nexus. A predicate is seen as a property that a subject has or is characterized by. We also dealt with the other grammatical units of the predicate. They are direct object, indirect object and subject complement. A direct object receives the action performed by the subject. Indirect object tells to whom or for whom something is done. A subject complement is something that completes our idea of the subject of a sentence by giving us more information about the subject. Now you know that all these parts form a perfect sentence. We then saw that depending on the usage of these parts, a sentence can be constructed primarily in three different ways, them being simple sentences, compound sentences and complex sentences. You learnt that a simple sentence has only one independent clause and that is the most basic form of any sentence. We then dealt with complex sentences. Now you know that a compound sentence can be constructed by joining two or more simple sentences with the use of a comma, a conjunction, a conjunctive verb or a semicolon. We then saw what a subordinate or independent clause is and learnt that a complex sentence has an independent clause joined by one or more dependent clauses or subordinate clauses. We then saw a modification of compound sentence called a compound complex sentence, which is the combination of the two mentioned sentences. You saw a few illustrations to remember these types of sentences. We then saw the importance of sentence structure. If you learn the structure of sentences and understand the formation properly, you can make a very good sentence. The first step to the fluency of a language is mastering the structure of sentences. Thank you.